For years, the NCAA has been a billion-dollar industry. In a financial statement for the year ending in 2017, the NCAA reported over $1 billion in total revenue. These astonishing numbers have raised one of the most controversial arguments in college sports history, which is whether or not college student athletes should be paid to play. Considering their contributions to all this revenue being brought in with their hard work, time, and dedication, most people will argue that they need some sort of compensation for this. But as an avid sports fan and a college student, I respect the hard work and dedication that these athletes put into their programs, but I do not think that these athletes should be paid to play. With that being said, I'm going to give you some of the reasoning behind why I think college athletes should not be paid to play. The main reason that I think college athletes should not be paid to play is that they're already being paid. With more than 150,000 students receiving over $2 billion in athletic scholarships each year from NCAA members, in the last decade, NCAA schools have awarded more than $17 billion in athletic scholarships. The average college student will graduate with about $35,000 in student debt. With athletic scholarships being given out, it will offset this amount for college students. According to the USA Today, a full men's basketball scholarship can be worth up to at least $120,000 per year when you factor in the goods, services, and resources that are available to them. Even when athletes do not receive an athletic scholarship, they have a variety of other financial aid available to them, including academic scholarships and federal Pell Grants. Student athletes' earnings from their part-time employment jobs are not included when they're filing for financial aid, so therefore they will most likely get more money than a regular student who works a part-time job. Division I athletes have access through their campuses and conference offices to more than $75 million from the NCAA Students Assistance Fund, which these resources can be used in a variety of different ways, from helping a student fly home in event of tragedies to purchasing a winter coat or any other needed clothing that they might need and might not be able to afford. Student athletes receive academic support such as tutoring and have access to athletic-focused academic advisors in addition to the traditional academic advisors that most traditional students have. The NCAA also provides resources each year to schools as a part of the Academic Enhancement Fund. Student athletes are not only being paid scholarships and goods and services, but they're also being paid in publicity, which for most Division I college athletes, publicity is the only reason why they choose a certain school, because it opens up doors for opportunities for them to go pro or any other level above college in their sport. The other problem with paying college athletes is that even with the revenue being made from sports, colleges still don't profit enough to pay their athletes a salary, plus what scholarships, grants, and resources that they are given. What most people overlook is what portion of this revenue is actually profited after expenses are paid for such things as upgrading their equipment, their training facilities, paying their coaches, and paying for scholarships, and etc. According to the USA Today, in 2016 to 17, Texas University brought in the most revenue out of all 230 NCAA schools at $214 million, and out of that $214 million, on $207 million of that were spent in expenses to their university. So considering the amount of revenue, the profit margins aren't so great, and that's for the most profitable school in the NCAA, which leads to my next point. When most people think of the profits that are made by NCAA sports programs, they think of basketball and football, which brings in the majority of the revenue, but what they overlook is how little of the revenue is made by the other sports such as soccer, baseball, their swim teams, etc. So when paying these athletes, is it fair to pay the swim team, who brings in a quarter of the revenue that a college football athlete may bring in? Or, well, the answer to that is no. The inequality of the revenue generated by different schools is a big factor in why it is unfair for colleges to have to pay college athletes. Only some of the biggest names in the NCAA, such as Kentucky, Texas, and Texas A&M, would be able to afford to pay their athletes. According to the analysis by Listland from 2013, it was found that only 23 of the 230 Division I schools can afford to pay athletes. As a matter of fact, they are the only schools that generate enough money to cover their expenses and aren't operating at a loss. So is it fair for a school such as Alabama A&M, who brought in only $3 million in revenue, to have to pay the same salary to their athletes as Texas A&M, who brought in $211 million? The answer to that is no. And that leads to my final reasoning as to why college athletes should not be paid, which is because if they paid college athletes, it would take the competition of the collegiate sports out of college sports in general and make the prestige of a school and its education irrelevant to the top athletes looking for which schools to commit to. A student athlete focuses on education and sports, unlike professionals who focus on only their sport alone. They are students receiving access to a college education through their participation in sports, for which they earn scholarships to pay tuition, fees, room and board, and allowable expenses. This makes student athletes to be more passionate about their sport because they are playing for the school rather than the money. If the athletes were to get compensation, the competitiveness that people love about college sports would then be taken away. Also, if athletes were not to get paid, university popularity would be measured on the amount of compensation that would be available to these athletes rather than the quality of the education that is offered. So, given that when you factor in how much college athletes are already being paid, which is already far beyond any normal college student, and seeing that the profitability margins for colleges isn't what most people think, after factoring in the expenses and seeing the inequality in revenue between the top NCAA colleges and the bottom NCAA colleges, making it unfair to the smaller universities that don't profit as much on the sports, as well as ruining schools' reputation in the face of college sports, makes paying athletes a salary nearly impossible and shouldn't even be in the debate.